biased if we collect the data incorrectly. If we use your standard biased decisions that humans have been making already about race, gender, economic status, then if we use that data, of course the systems are going to make the same bad mistakes, biased mistakes that humans do.
Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Mayn Idea podcast, where today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Cindi Thompson. A quick reminder for those that enjoy this podcast, please take a few seconds to submit a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. This helps the show get discovered organically and will allow me to continually bring forward incredible guests. You can also check out my amazing sponsor, Athletic Greens, in the show notes below. Cindi Thompson is CEO and co-founder of Climate Companion, which offers knowledge fusion for sustainability experts. Cindi has a background in artificial intelligence and data science, working primarily in academia and consulting. Through her pragmatic approach to data science, artificial intelligence, and climate science, Cindi aims to help humans work synergistically alongside AI to make informed decisions that will better the inhabitants of this planet and the environment alike. I hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Without further ado, the smart and talented Cindi Thompson. Well, Cindi, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. As I said before the show, I've been very excited to have you on to speak about some pressing and important issues, so I appreciate it.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to my friend Chris Geisler for connecting us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was such a great conversation with him, and it's really exciting to see how the connections can spread in any situation, right? You have a conversation like that with Chris, and then it leads to this conversation, and with Alex, diving deeper into the ideas of artificial intelligence and maybe some of the different arenas that this plays in. And that's one place that I wanted to start, because I feel like artificial intelligence is a very interesting topic, right? It's complex, it's deep, there's history, there's future. I think the easiest thing to draw from it, and Alex and I touched on this, is the Terminator idea, right? That this is some sentient robots that are out to get us. What you're doing is a really beautiful application of artificial intelligence being used to, help those of us on this planet and look into the future and make decisions that really do mean something, not just for us, but for the planet. So maybe you could just speak a little bit to what artificial intelligence means to you, what drew you to it, and how you found yourself in the arena of environment and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, great. What drew me to AI, I think just the promise of having some other entities that we can collaborate with and work with to make everything, to help improve our lives, to help make things better. My first inspiration as a younger person was Data on Star Trek, that I wanted to help build that guy. So that's kind of my first reason to get into AI. And I've been in AI for my whole career in academia and consulting. But, whenever that came out, Al Gore's movie, The Inconvenient Truth, and I've always cared about the environment. But when I saw that movie, I thought, sometime I have to do something in my career that helps with this big problem. And I did think that AI could be used to serve upward trend types of things like solving climate change. And there are a lot of applications for artificial intelligence and climate change in general. And we're integrating many pieces of it in my company. So it's just, I look at it as that, technology alone is not a solution, but technology working with humans. I think a lot of AI is going that way, that it's a partner, not like this separate thing that tells us all the answers. It's still not good enough to do that. And I don't know, it's more like another person that we work with, and it's not even that good yet, but let's not exaggerate. But there are many tools for us to work together with and help, augment our brains in a way.
Yeah, it seems foreign and scary. I can understand why people have hesitation towards the idea of integrating artificially intelligent systems or beings with us, right? Because it's outside of ourselves, and it's truly hard to comprehend the level of intelligence that we're actually talking about when we say that. How
Yeah.
quickly these programs can compute. You see the examples of beating chess players that have spent their entire life
Right.
playing this game, becoming in the smallest percentile of people that are excellent at it. And not only not knowing the game, but learning how to play it and then beating people in a extremely short amount of time, and doing it in a way that is counterintuitive to the way that humans would think to do it. Playing moves that a human would never play because they wouldn't ever make that sacrifice. And to me, I think that's the most exciting part, is that it's viewing reality in a way that perhaps we can't actually see it. Not that means that it's a negative outcome or bad or scary, but to work alongside that. And when you look at the idea of the climate crisis rate, 7.92 billion people on the earth, we have some problems to figure out. There's some things that we need to solve. And it feels like the assistance of something that might not be partial to our ideologies and varying differences therein could be wildly impactful in how we choose to make decisions.
Yeah, so much there to unpack. I mean, AI is very good at recognizing patterns. You mentioned chess, but since then there's been, AlphaGo, which looks at the board, and it plays itself and learns how to do these things that it represents information in a different way than humans. So that's why it comes up with things like you would never expect. And it makes mistakes that humans would never in a million years makes, because it's all about looking for patterns. And sometimes it sees patterns that are kind of spurious or noise or not significant to the problems that are being solved. And yes, that can be scary when something happens that you totally didn't expect. But listen, other people do things you totally didn't expect.
Right.
So, and we're not all that rational all the time. So, anyway, I could go off on cognitive biases and how that's, that our cognitive biases are make it more challenging to solve these more complex problems like climate change. And I think that with the help of AI, it can help assist us to remember that, we might be making an error because of our cognitive biases, our evolutionary history that made us look short term, close by. Is there a tiger there in the bushes? So that's part of part of my response to what you just talked about. And I had some other thoughts, but now I can't remember.
Maybe you could unpack that a little, just because we do have the time. This idea of cognitive biases, especially as it pertains to climate solutions.
Climate. Yeah.
What does that look like in your industry, and what do you kind of see as some of the bigger things to tackle there? Yeah. And maybe on the back end of that, we could bring in how AI really drives to assist this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll get to the cognitive biases, but one other thing I wanted to mention is that it is complex. Many of the big problems in front of us are because they're complex systems, and it's very hard for one person to keep all that in their mind. Something that we like to talk about is that there's no silver bullet for climate change. There's only silver buckshot. There's a whole, this is not mine. This is from
great,
Catherine Hay.
Take it.
I'm spreading it. Yeah. I got it from Catherine Hayhoe and Bill McKibben. These are two activists in the climate realm, for those who aren't familiar. But there's no technology to help us manage that silver buckshot that is needed to coordinate these complex systems like climate change itself, and then climate and human society interactions. So that's the framing I wanted to put around my answer to cognitive biases. Um, the way that climate has often been framed in the past, and we're getting better at helping people understand it or communicate about it, but it's seen as slow moving, far away, impersonal, and in the future. And all of these are not things that we evolved to address. You know, we evolved to address things right in front of us that are connected deeply to our well being or to our children's well being. And so we need to make it more connected. And now it is more to many people because, you know, we're seeing more hurricanes, more intense hurricanes, more fires, you know, flooding, all kinds of storms, the heat wave that's going on right now. So it is becoming more personal and in our face. So it is, people are becoming more, oh, this is a real thing in it, and we better act. But you know, it's also not a familiar threat. There's no person we can, you know, we're used to like, I said, there's the tiger, there's the person attacking us. It's not a person that's the evil being here, you know, it's the whole system. And so figuring out ways to help with AI and other tools and with each other, you know, enabling that collaborative, collective intelligence that we can overcome those biases.
And so is with Climate Companion, it's very clear that you're addressing kind of this archaic structure that's in place to monitor these types of things between groups, between organizations, activists, to collect the data, analyze the data, and then make decisions on the data. And so at Climate Companion, you're aiming to streamline this system, essentially put it all in one language that everyone can understand. And then the hope is that you can aggregate more total data across different countries, different regions, different scientific groups, research groups, and then make informed choices in a faster period of time there?
Yes, that's very well. Thanks. You you articulated it very accurately. Like, we do need help to streamline, to make decisions about this aggregated information. So there's I guess an approach out there called decision intelligence that's, again, augmenting us with these tools that help us make those decisions, help us collect things. We also talk a lot about knowledge fusion. So you might have heard about data fusion or sensor fusion, like you have all these sensors out there you need. But knowledge fusion is not just data, but structure, context, semantics, processes, rules, logic, everything that's needed to relate things and to let people follow the chains of what's going to happen in the future or what else might impact the decisions you're trying to make now. And then also pivot it around to look at it from other points of view that you might not have considered, because nobody can have all the knowledge about a situation. You know, you might have some knowledge, this other expert over here might have some knowledge, and bringing that all together to aggregate it together and make those decisions with more context is kind of at the heart of what we do.
And so if I'm thinking kind of from the hypothetical perspective here of the artificial intelligence system that's running this, is that I can then go into this data set and look for patterns that maybe it would take Cindi Thompson 10 years to collaborate with other scientists in Canada and in the UK to sift through all this, but I can do it in record time. Now, one thing that Alex and I spoke about is when artificial intelligence makes decisions, they're making it based on a set of parameters, right? So you give it you say, hey, assess this data for patterns X, Y, Z, and then produce outcome A, B, or C. And so it will do that the same way that you I run into this problem with design. I want something built on a website. I talk to an engineer. They do it exactly how I told them to, which a lot of times lacks the creative interpretation. And so it ends up being this process that you continually refine to get to what you want to do. So
For sure.
what is in place to not to police the outcomes, but to assess the validity of some of the decisions that might be arrived at from the assessment of this type of data?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I mean, these systems do often have like an objective function, a goal that you're trying to optimize. And there are ways with different AI techniques to look at the reasoning behind why the system made the decision it did, right? And so that's one way to kind of know. And you can never, it's all probabilistic, so you can never know that it's the right decision. The future, if I could read the future, I'd be a millionaire, right? Or billionaire, probably.
So you might be a little more wealthy than that, yeah.
Yeah, a billionaire these days. Millionaire used to be enough.
No, you can't even look at a plot of land in San Francisco. You're not even allowed to call the place.
No, that's true. But you just have to be, it's good to be able to use systems. We've got this knowledge base that people can sift through and examine and look at it with this augmented brain and then show it to other people and help them, like the system helps them view it from their perspective. Well, I'd rather see this, how does this connect to this other thing that I know about? And did you consider, search for a particular concept in the knowledge base did it consider this factor when it was making that decision? And then maybe you can add it to that objective function that is being used for the system to learn new concepts and find patterns.
So I'm an easy sell on this. I'm already a fan, right? This sounds wonderful to me, and I'm kind of on board for in the same way that I think self-driving cars produce a much better outcome in the long run. There's some heartaches in the short term, and that's part of any time that you're testing a system like this. The inhuman element is the most difficult thing to digest, because put yourself in the shoes of any person who's injured, harmed, loses a loved one as a result of a program that's running, essentially. For some reason, that's much, much harder for us psychologically to digest than a crazy, person losing their mind and quickly turning and harming someone, right? Which is probably more likely, and it's less likely to change, whereas the efficiency of these self-driving systems will continually improve at a rate that's much, much different than you could ever address the psychological trauma of the world, right? So I'm very much on board for this. How do you make the argument for those that are resistant to artificial intelligence, that don't want systems making human decisions, and that maybe don't believe that those operating the systems, assessing the data, the outcomes, and cross-examining that for ethics and morals? How do you bring that person into the conversation so that this is something that can move forward on a global scale? Which is, that's what has to happen, right? But how do we get there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It definitely, the mistakes are more dramatic or more impactful in some domains than others, like self-driving cars or healthcare. Where there's regulatory bodies that help make the decision about whether a technology is good enough to automate completely, like self-driving cars, or have a human in the loop, so to speak,
right,
where there's still a check and balance there, like robotic surgery. I have a niece who's doing this, where she's there's the robot, but she and the doctor are there to assess whether it's kind of doing the right thing, right? So I think, there is going to be resistance, and some people you're just never going to convince. And if it affects them directly, that's a different thing. They can choose not to use that technology, or they, in our system, you can turn on and off certain, like you don't have to completely trust the decision to the system. It can, again, explain what the decision is, and you can decide, we're going to make mistakes, but as you say, there's going to be crazy people out there. But I think, people also don't always realize how much technology already makes decisions for them. I
have this conversation constantly with friends.
Yeah. If you're using social media, it's making decisions for you all the time. If you're even like, I have a smart thermostat, it's making decisions whether to turn that on. There's so much automation in our lives that we just don't even know. Your doctor is probably using a lot of augmented tools. So it's coming, whether people are in, some people have more or less comfort. They can, go live in an isolated place. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answer, but
it's funny. I've had this, the way that I look, I mean, my phone's right here. I've said this before on the show. My phone's right here. It's with me 24/7. I happen to use it for promoting the show, marketing, social media, all this stuff. If I want to get home from 2 hours away, I use it to get home faster than I would if I didn't. And I love it, right? We all love it. That's why we use it. We throw Apple Watches on our wrists so that we can respond to messages. Yeah. There's so many things that we readily accepted 10 years ago without ever throwing up arms when things were much more in their infancy than they are now.
Right.
And it is part of your life. It is just not integrated into your physical body. But take the phone away from someone who uses it all the time, they will have neurological responses to not having the item. So I don't. It's really hard for me to get on board with the fear arguments of I don't know if I trust it, because I'm like, if that's truly how you feel, I respect that 100%. But you needed to make that decision 20 years ago. It already it's suggesting where you should eat. Think of
right.
I always use the example of like restaurants, because this is very easy to understand, and it's such a small example of how this works. But you think about all the restaurants you've eaten at in the last 5 months. How many of those did you eat at because you knew the owner, or a friend of yours suggested it and they found it organically? The majority of places you go, you find because they were suggested. They were shown to you. It was fed to you on some different platter from some different place. And that's how we do almost everything now. And it will be, only when they make documentaries and shows and stuff analyzing this, and you really see how much of our decision-making process is impacted by technology on a day-to-day basis all the time. Yeah. It's already there. Where I feel like we're already in that spot that people are concerned about us getting to. And now it's how do we turn this into a good thing? Right? How do we build relationships with artificial intelligence that are meaningful, that allow us to assess the world around us and make smart choices instead of the choices that we've seemed to make over the course of history, which haven't been the wisest.
Yeah, no, I mean, viewing the system as a partner, it's all about that collective intelligence with these systems as just one piece of the puzzle that you're collaborating with and that you're making decisions with. But yeah, these were great examples of ways that it's already in our lives, and that there's almost no turning back at this point. We're getting dopamine hits. You talked about social media a little bit in there, and where we're getting our information. And so if you lose that, your brain changes. I mean, and it is great. I mean, I unplug once a year at least for at least a day, and don't even look at any of the stuff. Just be with myself, my books, my journal, or whatever. And you need that because you get a little bit maladapted to that constant dopamine hit, or that constant bias away from what you really think and believe. You're in this filter bubble. But but having the access to so many diverse sources of intelligence and helped, like you said, to in everyday tasks. It's I find new routes to my home every time because, well, traffic is crappy this other way that I usually go. And so um, just having those little things that make life better will, I think, will eventually, convince people.
You touched on an interesting point, which I've been thinking about as specific to this integration of artificial intelligence and climate is where you get your information. And this is, seems to be a challenge that we all deal with. I mean, if you look at the last, two elections, there's plenty of examples of where getting your information is a serious impact. And there's so many channels to receive at this point. And whether you are in a bubble within your community or not, there's so many sources, and the vetting process seems to be sifting further and further away. So when we look at something like integrating artificial systems with climate, I can already see, Fox News running with artificial intelligent climate system makes poor decision, causes hurricane in the Philippines, like something like this. I mean, you can imagine and read the headlines already looking to scapegoat the system for a problem that isn't the system's fault. It's our thing that we created. So I imagine that is a source of resistance. What is kind of the action plan as this gets integrated more and more and climate decisions are made with artificially intelligent systems? Like, how do you prepare for that confrontation in a way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yes, there's going to be, there's already been news on automated, autonomous vehicles killing people. But the proportion of deaths from humans is much, much higher. I forget the exact statistics, right? But back to cognitive biases, humans are really bad at uncertain things in the middle from, all yes or all no, 100%, I'm sure.
Yep.
That middle ground is really difficult for humans to understand. And so understanding that, yes, it was somewhat the fault or the system made a mistake in this particular context, in this particular situation. And the way that the humans set it up, they didn't use all the data that was available. We need to look at all the different pieces and integrate all the different sources. And because of already humans having biases, there's this great book called Weapons of Math Destruction.
I love it.
MATH. About how our system can be biased if we collect the data incorrectly. If we use your standard biased decisions that humans have been making already about, based on race, gender, economic status, then if we use that data, of course the systems are going to make the same bad mistakes, biased mistakes that humans do.
That's an interesting aspect of these systems, is not just diversity, but socioeconomic diversity too. That when you're building something, like I said before, it's going to do what you tell it to do. And if you build that with a bias in place, then the outcome's already going to have that bias as a running parameter within it. So how do you control for that? Like, as someone in the space of artificial intelligence, how do you create diverse like programming groups to come up with this stuff? Just considering, I don't know how diverse of an industry artificial intelligence is, and maybe it's much more so than I'm thinking, but how do you create a good environment for that?
Yeah, no, I think people are becoming more aware that it is very I mean, it's male dominated, it's white dominated, it's um, and climate change activism is also dominated that way. But bringing in, people are becoming more aware of working with, indigenous communities. There's so much wealth of information and knowledge in, for example, in indigenous communities, the way they've been managing the forests, for example, and farming and on and on. So, with many things, awareness and education is the first step. But then, there's still, research in finding ways to translate that knowledge into, to augment the data sets that are collected already with that, more diverse information. And, that's again, that silver buckshot, that knowledge fusion that's needed to combine and integrate all those sources of knowledge, go out and explicitly collect them. And there's, more and more sources of, I don't know, almost regulations about, for example, the SEC is asking companies to disclose their climate risk, and figuring out through the whole supply chain of how to do that. You're forced to go out and get those diverse perspectives from all the companies you're working with, from all the partners you're working with, and integrate their points of view into the decisions you're making about what your risk is.
Do you have, is there excitement around, because I get excited about this, but I don't know what it would look like, and I don't know the timeline for this type of thing, but I feel like just from a withdrawn perspective, there's certain things that are quite underway in terms of changes, right? You can just physically see them in the world in the way that, like you mentioned, fires, hurricanes, melting of ice. I mean, these are things that are just, I don't care what side of the line you're on. They just have to be recognized. Those are things that are imminent. They're in our life, and you can see and feel them, and they're happening. I get excited about the development of more artificial intelligence systems in being able to help solve or better understand how to gain back ground in some of these areas. From your understanding of industry and exposure to different groups and companies working within the climate space, what do you feel like about the future of impacting the changes that have already happened and gaining some of that ground back?
Yeah, I mean, climate change for AI can affect many areas, from, emission sources, figuring out how to reduce that, to removing carbon from the atmosphere, which is a really exciting kind of newer area. Climate prediction, to decision making, even just education, and again, collaboration, bringing people together. The oceans and the soil are two big areas that are have had some huge advances, and mining carbon from the ocean and from the air and storing it way down deep in the ocean, and then is one area, and then making our soils better, helping farmers make those decisions about when to plant crops, what cover crops to plant, how much to water. There's so many examples of decisions that can be that AI can help to augment the farmers. Already, they know, but the situation is very dynamic, and handling those dynamic situations is tough for humans. When it's harder to predict. It's also tough for AI, but what they can do again is AI systems can recognize those patterns, that somewhere else that pattern was present, and here's what was done in that situation. And so can it apply with some modifications to my situation?
To me, that's kind of beautiful, to be honest. It's encouraging to hear that is happening, because it is easy to view how impactful that could really be. I mean, if you look
Yeah.
at the total number of farmers in the United States alone, and you could, not reduce crop yield, but reduce the water consumption per farmer across the entire system by
Yeah.
recognizing a pattern about seasonality. I mean, that is that is something that you cannot get to as just individuals that are stuck in different parts of the country
Right.
talking about crop cycles. You have to have the ability to assess total usage on a scale like that and communicate universally between people. That's
Right.
I get so excited about that because it's anecdote to the fear mongering of the climate changing as it is, which it can be really scary when you wrap your head around it. We are
Right.
wildly comfortable in parts of the world, if you think about it, to be sitting in our offices right now having this conversation with the AC on and a moderate temperature outside. If it were as bad as it can get, it's a bad that we have never been able to comprehend. It is not like you go outside and you sweat a little bit. It is water shortages, food shortages, people that die. It's so much worse than we're willing to entertain on a day-to-day basis. It's not a conversation that you're going to have at the dinner table with your family after a long day of work. It's uncomfortable. And when I hear things like this, it is really uplifting to know that people are working on it, that they're collaborating and they're bringing their heads together. When we talk about ocean, this is a complex problem. And changes that are happening on the ocean floor for millennia are starting to impact the way that gases are released in the ocean and the way that they change. Are there any industries right now or areas within climate change that are not on board with integrating this type of technology or that are resistant to utilizing this for decision-making purposes?
Yeah. Let me think about that, but I want to go back to one point you said about, you were talking about how it's hard to talk about. And it is big and scary. And again, back to how we've communicated about it over time. Fear doesn't motivate because you're in fight or flight. You just need to get away. But like you're saying, like you're implying, seeing that there's these solutions, and what little part can I play in this solution? What can I do? And either, like myself, I quit my job to figure out how can I apply my skill set to this problem. And not everybody has that option, but there's many things you can do on the side. But again, back to Katharine Hayhoe, one of my fans in the climate space. She's a climate scientist, and she talks a lot with more conservative groups to find alignment on values. What do we value together, and then move forward to solve these hard problems. But the biggest thing, she always says, the biggest thing you can do about climate change is talk about it. So I'm so pleased that we're having this conversation, and that more people hopefully will be inspired to talk to people. People care a lot about this, and just having someone else acknowledge that and be willing to open up and talk about it is a great step towards figuring out, okay, now what can we do as a group or in our community? Because it's going to take both top down and bottom up kind of effort to solve these problems. So I just wanted to say that part, because when you're talking about how hard it is to talk about.
Well, I did a conversation with Scott Denning, who's a PhD at the University of Colorado State, and he teaches and speaks on climate and climate change. And he said the same thing. He's like, he's been doing this his whole life. He's, for well before climate was talked about, and will continue well after. And it seemed like the biggest thing was just keeping it conversational, talking to other people about it, asking about it, and not in a way that's, I like what you said, that, using fear as a motivator doesn't change things in this realm. And it's very true, because I think sometimes the failure in messaging alone just completely divides people. I mean, look no further than COVID, right? I feel like there are millions of people that became resistant to vaccine administration, or became much more engulfed by it because of how the information was coming down the pipeline, because it became so polarizing in certain areas. Whereas here's here's a situation where we have a potentially globally life-threatening issue, and we have the technology to produce a vaccine and solve it for the first time ever. Let's get on board, right? Like, there were so many ways I feel like it could be delivered to give the right information, inform everyone of what's going on, and give them a solution to it that's positive, that helps everyone stay safe at basically no risk at all. You know, go back to the Spanish flu, go back to the blue. People would be lining up at the doorstep for the one free shot that gets them out of risk, right? And it's a failure in messaging. And I think that things like this, where you can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, or you can see that there are groups of people that are thinking about this thing on a deep level, and there are groups that are trying to collaborate to come up with solutions instead of just sitting here going, well, we're never going to be able to fix it in my generation, so I'm just going to keep going about, we are in this together. And if there's something that we can do on an individual level that's super small and feels like it's not impactful at all, that's better than doing nothing.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I love what you were just saying. And we are in this together, and just having, again, tools to empower people to realize that they have something to contribute, and to give them, there's just not those tools right now that empower people. And if you've heard of the no code movement, that's part of what we're doing at Climate Companion, is kind of empowering people to figure out, okay, what piece of the puzzle do I know about, and how can I contribute that to this greater good, to contributing to solving this problem that affects all of us. And it's really important to figure out how to get beyond business as usual to improving on that business as usual, for one thing, and then improving on how we improve. So how did we try that improvement, and how did that work? And what else can we, what improvement can we make on improving, like our attempts to optimization? And that is one of the thought leaders we build on, that idea of improving on how we improve, kind of that meta reasoning comes from Doug Engelbart, and that's one of our the experts whose shoulders we stand on every day. That collective intelligence, that enabling people to see we are in this together, and they're empowered to make a difference on these problems. Talking about fear doesn't empower people, but talking about, well, here's a solution. How does that relate to anything you might know about, or your friends might know about? Who do you know that knows about that? It's just so hopeful to make, some positive change.
Do you feel there are ways to get, complex information that you might have the access to through your systems, and bring that down to maybe more like I'll call it like the general public level? So your platform as a service, right, working with organizations and businesses, what about someone, like myself, who, for example, wants to make a more informed climate choice throughout the day, but I can't see the patterns of places maybe beyond like general, take a shorter shower, don't leave the water, like those basic kind of things that I think we've become more accustomed to. But do you see a channel where artificial intelligence and climate can deliver to the individual level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is hopeful and important to make those individual changes, or to know what you can do, and often that has a knock-on effect to, like, once one person in the neighborhood gets solar panels, that tends to increase the number of solar panels. So yeah, just there are lots of apps out there that, there's kind of ways to reduce your footprint, kind of apps, way to offset. That's a little tricky, like when you fly or things like that. Food waste is a big area of climate impact that people aren't always aware of. there's an organization called Drawdown. We actually at Climate Companion, we started looking at food waste because Drawdown ranked it as the third most, the first and third most impactful. Reducing food waste is an impactful way to mitigate climate change. And so there's apps to help with that. You're planning, remind you you've got strawberries in the back of your fridge that are going to go bad. And it's not just it's both the resources that went into growing those strawberries, all the water and whatever that went into it. And then it's the methane emissions once that goes to the landfill if you don't compost it. And of course, even composting is kind of wasting it, but at least that's not as bad as going to the landfill. So there's apps for many of these things for the individual, and if that gets you going and gets you up in the morning and keeps you hopeful as one more piece of the puzzle, that's great. There's apps to help you figure out, well, what's an hour of action I can take this week or this month to call my congressperson, or tweet about something to encourage people to vote for this new act that's before the Congress to get today, the infrastructure bill. So there's just so many options for apps that the individual can.
See, that's interesting because I didn't even, admittedly, I didn't know that. I didn't know that there's, which now in, saying this out loud, I kind of feel foolish because of course there are. Of course there's apps to reduce your waste, but just the fact that here we are having this conversation and that's where it comes up is just another feather in the hat of the importance of communication around this kind of stuff and having conversations at multiple levels, be that the academic level, the just average person having a conversation about it. The food waste thing is really interesting because that plays to the complex nature of this problem that we have, right? Because on the front side of it, yes, you don't want the strawberries in your fridge to go bad because you should eat them. That's why you bought them. But if everyone paid attention more to what's in their fridge and tried to have only what they were going to consume and not what they weren't, that would change the supply and demand structure of production. And so if there's less total demand because people are actually more efficient in what they're doing, now there's going to be less produced. And if less is produced, just keep zooming out on the supply train of what happens to get the strawberry into your actual fridge. It's a lot of carbon emission and it's a lot of packaging and processing and, the list goes on. So you take something so minor like that, and it doesn't mean that every single person has to live off the grid in a recycled water shower. And, that's not the point. The point is that little changes on an individual level have a large scale effect if a lot of people get on board and do it. But that does bring me to my next point, and maybe a big concern, which is this idea of the tipping point. I remember when I was I went to the University of Colorado Boulder, and in my atmosphere class, we did a whole semester on climate, and we talked a lot about this idea of a tipping point. Are we too far? Are we, on a geological time scale? The changes that we're seeing now have been in play for, many, many years. It's not like the errors that we made yesterday are showing up today. So again, this is where I think artificial intelligence becomes such an integral part in the solution because of the computing power of these decision-making ability. Do you have any concerns or sentiments about this idea of a tipping point and where we may find ourselves along that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, the climate scientists know what's happening, and everybody has. I think when you use terms like tipping point, what does that even mean? Does that mean that we're all gonna die as a species, or are we heading to a extreme sea level rise, and that it's going to be really challenging? It's again, it's not a matter, it's not extremes, but there's shades of gray, things in between this whole continuum from we're all going to die to we're going to be fine. We're not all going to be fine. Unfortunately, a lot of the changes are already built in, are baked into the system, to the climate system. But there are, the relation to AI is that scientists are using these tools to consolidate all the research that's out there, to see what other research other people have done in this area, what predictions can be made, and how likely different pathways are. If you look at the IPCC report, they talk a lot about probabilities of different climate change scenarios and different emission reduction and carbon removal technologies that can do that, to help the decision makers to say, all right, well, we've got to, if we're going to make this change by 2050, what do we have to do today and tomorrow to get there? Because it's not going to be overnight that we can't just switch from gas to electric vehicles, right, or all those other decisions.
I have a question that might be a little bit more like esoteric in in views. What do you, and I kind of propose this question to a lot of people in the field, but push us out 500 years. What excites you about artificial intelligence, and what kind of world do you really feel like we'll actually be living in? As, like we said before, and I couldn't agree more, it's inevitable and it's here. And so now it's how we evolve alongside it. What does that world look like to you?
Yeah, that's fun. I don't think about 500 years that often, but that's a fun question to think about. I mean, I think the world would be so different we can't even recognize it. Even 200 years ago, it's hard to recognize, horses versus cars versus planes versus. So can you even imagine it? But I do picture a much healthier world in terms of, so when I see it in my mind, it's so hard to convey it. But watching Star Trek and things like that, you can kind of see that. But they miss things like that. Everything is green. Like there's going to be solar on everybody's roofs. There's going to be green trees on roofs too. There's going to be living roofs. There's going to be transportation systems that we can't even imagine that aren't emitting greenhouse gases. We're going to be able to be in partnership with each other and with our technologies to have a future that's, equitable, that's regenerative. There's a lot of talk about sustainability, but I think regeneration is a better term.
I like that.
That we can regrow, reuse, re-empower ourselves as we go forward to have a future that works. People will be much more aware of what works for them, works for everyone, that we're kind of out of the fog of our cognitive biases and those, little lizards in our head that are telling us to, protect ourselves. That I think that people will be more aware that there is enough for all if we, manage things in a more regenerative way, and that I don't know. I could go on, but yes, I think AI. Maybe there won't even be a term like AI anymore. It'll just be this is one of the tools in our tool set, just like a hammer and a drill bit and a refrigerator. It's in our lives, in every part of our lives, that these tools are helping us to live healthier lives.
Do you see physical integration with these systems, implant type?
Oh,
I mean, I asked just because I think this stuff's really exciting, and I'm always most curious for people that are actually exposed to these types of systems and actually have you have a dog in the fight, so to speak. This is something that much more about than I would ever know if I spent the rest of my life trying to figure it out. So aside from the sci-fi angles of what this can look like you said, 500 years, a long time, right? It's hard to even comprehend 500 years ago. And to see things like, I look at a city like New York, which I love, right? I love walking around New York, and I can just picture us looking back on that and it just looking like an industrial the same way that a factory just looks like somewhere you absolutely would never want to work, like that environment and the smokestacks and the emission and the cramped quarters. And not to say that we get to a Jetsons type of place where we're all raised above, but I'm very optimistic about the future. I think that these speed bumps that we're experiencing right now and the conversations we're having, they're uncomfortable, but with discomfort comes great change. And I think it's the point in our species' trajectory where it feels chaotic right now. There's a lot of polarity and disagreement, and in the same way that when you're a youth, you have growing pains and you can't sleep at night, it's because you're getting bigger, you're changing, your brain's developing. And sometimes I feel like we're in the minutia of that right now. It's this like chaotic developmental period, and AI to me feels like this very great solution to start to maybe propel that in the right direction towards where we go. And we could see, interplanetary exploration in 500 years. How incredible would that be?
No, I left that out, but I was focused on Earth, but I do agree that interplanetary is possible and almost definitely going to happen. It's already happening, right? But I love that what you said, with discomfort comes great change. That that we do have growing pains as a species, right? We're still evolving physically and mentally. I think you mentioned physical integration. We don't have things embedded yet, but we will. I do think, I don't know what form it's going to take, but whether it's something in our eyes or in our Elon Musk has some ideas about some brain mesh thing. I don't know, but I don't know how realistic that stuff is. But it will be. I think there's already things that doctors can inject into your bloodstream that are little nanorobots and things like that. So it's definitely coming. It's going to be there probably in less than 100 years, 500 years, but more like 100. But there will be growing pains, and there already have been. All through society, there's big shifts in history, and this is another shift that's going to happen. But I do think that we can again rise above kind of where we are to getting to a more positive place. I mean, there's a lot of fear and bad things happening, but we have the tools. We have all the tools we need to move beyond that and to get to a more positive place. There's a lot of books on, factfulness is one that people might have heard of, where things really are, people live longer, people are healthier, there's less pollution, like you were talking about in New York City. LA, you used to not be able to see the mountains. Right. I know it got worse for a while, but I think it's better. Things like that, where things are getting more equitable and healthy, and
there's a book by Steven Pinker called Enlightenment that also touches on this. It's basically a thick book of the data of history and what we're actually looking at. I mean, we need to remember that there was a point in recent time where people used to gather at the Coliseum to watch people fight to the death, right? That was we've come we've come a long way, and in many different arenas, not just, that's one example because it paints such a clear picture, and everyone studied Rome at some point in their life. But there is, a disease can come out and we can produce a vaccine in under a year to treat it. These are, it's disheartening sometimes to fail to recognize how magnificent of a time it is to actually be alive with what is available. And it's not to downplay hardship, and that there's things in this world that we absolutely have to address, and that there's, I again say this from the ivory tower of the comfort of my office, right? I wasn't born in a third world country with no food at all and a place to live. So I will never empathetically or physically understand what that is like. And that is something that as a species we should aim to fix, because that's completely unfair that just by
Yeah.
happenstance, someone is born into that and I'm not.
Right.
But in the total, what a time to be able to know people working on systems that are going to help understand the problems in our world and then work towards solutions that are applicable to billions of people. That is incredible. And that's not something that could have been done 200 years ago, when to communicate with someone in Europe, you had to sail for 4 months to get there and to deliver, hey, they're going to come for you in a couple of years, or, whatever it is. I mean, the transfer of information was so slow and ideas spread so slowly. So it is uplifting. Now I'm just spewing that my excitement over these types of conversations to hear that there's optimism baked into a lot of what you're working on. When you look kind of on the horizon for Climate Companion, what are some of the things that you really are passionate about making happen, or seeing the unity between what you guys are doing at Climate Companion and those that you're looking to connect with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're starting in industry wise. We're starting with the solar industry, with clean infrastructure, regenerative infrastructure. So in each kind of industry we go to, we want to help enable people to make half a gigaton of reductions per year, and that's a tiny proportion, like 1% of our emissions per year. But if we do that, then in each industry that adds up, and many other organizations are aiming for that kind of threshold. The Breakthrough Energy Foundation that Bill Gates is involved in uses half a gigaton of impact as kind of a minimum viable criteria. So if we get to, many other industries, and then people are using our tools, and people are also able with we have an idea of a knowledge model marketplace where people can buy and sell their solutions to others. And so then their half a gigaton turns into the 10 people they sold to being, 50 gigatons. So that's what our goal and our North Star is to work on the climate impact. And we see, just a note kind of on business wise, that you talked about resistant industries, and I don't think it's about demonizing any particular industry, but it's more about there's a structure in corporations that makes it difficult to prioritize stakeholders beyond your shareholders. But there's a newer movement called the Public Benefit Corporation, or B Corp, that it's a great trend that legally lets companies incorporate other stakeholders besides their shareholders, so that they can say that the environment, or that people in this particular economic structure, societal structure, the word I'm trying to get, so that those groups are incorporated into the metrics, the success metrics of a company. So that's our plan too, is to become a B corporation, and to let us legally, already we're, right now we're private, so nobody cares, but once we're public, that we have the legal right to incorporate the climate, the environment, the people in our decision making.
Yeah, the capitalist structure just of companies seems to present a little bit of a hurdle in bringing these kind of concepts to the forefront. But on the flip side of that, with systems, you are able to look out into, maybe I'm out of line here, but able to use the recognition of patterns to look further out into the future to see a potential effect of a decision being made now. So if you can show a company, hey, by reducing your carbon footprint or whatever the thing is that you're trying to represent. This is what might, this is what opportunities will present to your business, to your infrastructure, to your assets in the future as a result of doing this. And although financially the hit is, in the next 5 years, if we look at the next 50 years, we look at the next 30 years, then you can actually start to see that. And maybe that's a place where more people can get on board. But data is the language there, right? I mean, data is
for sure
what you will present and what you will show as the unifying currency, so to speak, to get people to see it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, seeing those projections of here's the money you're going to save, the time you're going to save, both internally and externally, for your stakeholders, for your customers, for your investors, for your partners. You're all going to be better off, and there's these network effects of how things will impact positively, more money, more time, more jobs, more flourishing in the whole community. And here's different probabilities of that again. Here's how long that might take with different decisions you make. Yes, with AI tools, all these decisions become a little bit easier to. Of course, you need to have ways to enter all that data and get access to other people's information and the decisions they've made and how they've worked out. And like Chris Geisler is working on that with his company, and we're working a little bit on that again with letting people to buy and sell their models from other people. So
I was going to ask if in terms of challenges, if one of them is just security company to company, like if to get access as a private company to the information that you need, is that something that you come up against?
Yeah, sometimes, but there's so much publicly available information now. And again, with climate disclosures or other kinds of disclosures, regulations about that. And there's a lot of more openness and awareness that if you share your information, that the bigger decisions will be easier to make for you and for others. But yeah, security does need to be incorporated, especially for privacy and other information, other regulations like that. That many tools, ours included, have the ability to anonymize data, to to say which parts get shared and which don't, that kind of thing, so that you can make it more private.
I'd like to close with a little bit on you making this decision. I often talk to people about the gusto that it takes to leave something, to start something different. It's something that I've done in my career, and I've always admired when people make that decision. It's very tough. And I want to know, given your tenure and your time in academia and data science, what was that moment like when you decided that you were going to leave all that behind to pursue Climate Companion and really go out on your own and start something absolutely different?
Yeah. No, it's definitely scary. I was at a good point in my career where I could do that, where I could kind of afford to not have income for a while. But I didn't plan to actually start a company when I quit my job. I quit my job with the idea that there is something in my skill set that can help with this problem. I don't know what it is yet. And I was exploring. I wrote a blog. I still have a blog that I don't post as much, but at first I was writing this blog to help me learn and explore publicly what are some options. And then I started talking to some friends, one of whom is now my co-founder, and she got excited about applying her skill set to this problem as well. And she's like, we have lots of ideas together, we have lots of skills, and here's some ideas that we can build this platform that can empower people to use those collective intelligence to fuse their knowledge, all these things. It's evolved over time. But yeah, it was scary, and it's still, I don't know what's going to happen. Most small businesses fail. But I think that I get up every morning thinking we've already made a difference in just talking to people like yourself, and thank you again for this opportunity. We've already made a difference by I've made a difference by doing this thing and showing people that, you can apply yourself to this problem. And there are many, many more jobs. There's some Slack groups I could mention, from climateaction.tech to Work on Climate to one called My Climate Journey, that you get into these Slack groups and you just see all the energy that's behind these issues. Both people who are staying in their companies and making a change from within is totally possible, and I just chose not to go that route. But all of these are options for virtually everyone to make little changes where they're at. They don't have to do something dramatic like quit their jobs. But
it's special, the power of community in those regards. When you do make a decision like that and you are able to surround yourself with, whether it's a Slack group of other people that are like-minded, or it's a co-partner or co-founder who, you find each other in this unique vein. I've always been I've been an athlete my whole life, but I've always been an individual sport athlete. So I skied competitively when I was a kid, and that shaped a lot of who I was. But I always had such a love for, even though I didn't have the time, but for team sports, because you can see the energy, and it doesn't have to be in the sporting world. It could be in theater, it could be in business, it could be anywhere. But you see what happens when people come together and they excite each other about stuff, because it brings you into the moment of what you're doing is powerful. And you're reminded by the other people in the community, by your co-founder, by people like Chris, by other people in the Slack group. And it's in those moments that you can feel enriched, that you're in the right place, you're doing the right thing. It's sometimes in the drawn out reflection where you get, am I in the right spot? Why did I leave my career? Things are going so well. And entrepreneurship is such a just kaleidoscope of emotions. Like you get, one day you're someone goes, you're doing such a good thing and we need more people like you. And you're like, yes. And it gives you a little bit of gas in your tank to drive another 100 miles. And then you start, your car starts going like this and you're like, wow, I think I'm going to buy a motorcycle. This is ridiculous. And then someone else comes by and they're like, with your systems, we were able to make a decision that, impacted X, Y, and Z and reduced their climate impact by this. And you're like, wow, I mean, we were part of that. That's special. I love hearing about that. I love when people do commit to doing something, and whether it's doing it at a point in your career that allows it or not, but that energy, the energy is the same, that you made a decision to go do something different because you recognized how impactful that can be. And you never know. I mean, I always like to just play these scenarios in my head, but here we are having this conversation. In the show notes, we're going to put every single thing that you just mentioned, all the links to the site, the different groups, ways that people can get involved. That lives there. Maybe someone sees that and they click on it. And now, through this weird spider web of interaction, one more person in the amount of people is thinking about this and doing something. And so as much as you said, I'm so grateful that you took the time to come on here, because I've seen now, having done this for a while, that the impact can be had and it can be there. And it can be there in so many different random places when you're doing this stuff.
Yes, you just never know. No, I agree. You just never know what's going to happen, these unexpected consequences. I mean, we talk about negative unintended consequences, but I think in this case, we've got a lot of positive unintended consequences that are going to come out of this show. I truly hope. I mean, I was on another, not a podcast, but like a meetup kind of thing that I went to, and I recorded it and put it out. And every once in a while I'll come to people and they'll be like, oh, I watched your YouTube. And I'm like, cool, that made a difference to you, and maybe you'll share it with a friend, or you'll get involved with one of these communities, and then one person can make a difference, and then the more the merrier when they connect up with these communities and get empowered. So,
well, closing thought here. If we scale back from this 500-year timeline and maybe look at something that's a little more evolutionary, primed in our system to think short term, what are some things that the people that are still listening at this point in the conversation, myself, what is kind of low-hanging fruit to get involved in this area and I mean not just climate change, but specifically the integration of climate change and technology, climate change and AI, because I really do feel like that's the ticket. That's where the most potential lies in this. So what do we say to the listener or the person that's curious but really doesn't know where to start, doesn't know where to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so many resources. There's a school too that I like called Terra.do that kind of educates people about these issues. But just for me, selfishly, if you're an organization or know an organization building clean, decarbonizing infrastructure, and if you're challenged by processes, workflows, data coordination, give us a ring. But if you're an individual looking where to plug in, all you have to do is search and you don't have to be a tech worker at all. I just happen to be one. There's marketers in these, business, all kinds of business people, scientists, and we want to empower those scientists, those climate experts, those sustainability experts. So those folks should join these communities, and there are so many ways to plug in. I don't know if there's one that you can do tomorrow when you wake up, but I talked to a friend recently who wants to make his career more meaningful, and he joined these communities the next day. So just go and explore, and there will be, getting started resources in all these places that you can explore and decide. You've got to do, if it's not something that gets you up in the morning, that makes you excited, don't do it because you feel obligated. Do it because it's something you love. What's your highest and best use for this wonderful life that we're granted, So
well, I love that. I think it's a wonderful closing thought, and it's true. And I like it most of all is the lack of pressure. I think taking pressure off of things can have a really big impact. And no one's pushing you to get involved, but if you care and it's something that sparks your interest or your curiosity, then we will put in the show notes here too. So if you're listening to this, in the show notes there will be all the links that Cindi has mentioned. So there will be things that you can click on and go listen and watch and learn. But Cindi, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate it. I know it's the middle of the day on a Tuesday, but these conversations must be had, and I really enjoyed your time.
Thank you, Abe. I enjoyed it as well. Have a great day.